Hello everyone and welcome to Western Sahara Uncovered. Today we'll be giving you a brief introduction to the history of Western Sahara. Western Sahara is a territory that was inhabited by the indigenous Sahrawi people who ran a nomadic or semi-nomadic lifestyle. They relied on herding and trading with people from all over the area. The life of the Sahrawi people was stable until the colonial powers started to come over. On November 14th of 1884, the European powers met at the Berlin Conference to share their intentions to colonize the African continent. Western Sahara was colonized by Spain. Even though they colonized the entire territory, they were mostly present in the coastal areas. Spain imposed its system and values when it came to education, culture, and politics. They did not respect the lifestyle of the Sahrawi people, and they imposed a system to which people had to adapt even though they were in their own country. In schools, they taught mostly the Spanish geography and history, instead of teaching the people their own geography and their own history of the territory of Western Sahara. Spanish as a language was also imposed, and people were forced to adapt to it. In the early 60s of the 20th century, Spain discovered in Western Sahara some of the richest phosphate reserves in the world. In order to secure its power and colonial presence in the territory, and to secure the plundering of the resources that it just discovered, Spain changed the status of Western Sahara to become the Spanish Sahara, the 53rd province of the Spanish state. They then forced the Spanish citizenship on the Sahrawi people, and even though a lot of them have it today, Spain is unwilling to recognize their dual nationality, Sahrawi and Spanish. In the late 60s and early 70s, the Sahrawi people started organizing themselves to claim their right to their own territory and to ask Spain to leave. On top of that, as the Fourth Committee of the United Nations was created, Spain was asked to decolonize the territory. Then, Spain announced its intention to celebrate a referendum where the people of Western Sahara could choose their future. They did run a census where they counted over 84,000 Sahrawis who were going to vote in the referendum. But that is when Morocco and Mauritania both claimed the territory. And they said that before the Spanish colonialism, Western Sahara belonged to them. It is important to mention that then the Polisario Front was already created, and it was claiming the right of the Sahrawi people to establish their own government, to establish their own entity, and to build an independent Western Sahara. The case was taken then to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, where Mauritania and Morocco brought their evidence to prove what they claimed as part of their territory. Less than a year later, the ICJ stated the following: the materials and information presented to it, the ICJ, do not establish any tie of territorial sovereignty between the territory of Western Sahara and the Kingdom of Morocco or the Mauritanian entity. Thus, the court has not found legal ties of such a nature as might affect the application of the Resolution 1514 in the decolonization of Western Sahara, in particular of the principle of self-determination through the free and genuine expression of the will of the peoples of the territory. After this decision, and even though the International Court of Justice and the United Nations were very clear when it came to the decolonization of Western Sahara and the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination, Spain still signed an illegal agreement with Morocco and Mauritania, Morocco invading the northern part and Mauritania invading the southern part of the territory. And suddenly the Sahrawi people found themselves between a double invasion from what they considered neighboring countries. That is when the armed struggle started and the Sahrawi people organized and represented themselves through the Polisario Front. Due to the consequences of the war and keeping in mind that Mauritania and Morocco were backed and supported by France and the United States of America, the Sahrawi people had to flee to refugee camps in southwest Algeria. In the year 1991, after 16 years of armed struggle, the Polisario Front and Morocco signed a ceasefire. This was an initiative from the Organization for African Unity, which was also supported by the United Nations. The referendum was expected to take place the year after, but Morocco put every possible trouble for the referendum not to take place. To this day, this referendum that both parties signed in 1991 has not taken place. The United Nations and the Security Council have not enforced their resolutions in order to push Morocco to agree to what they signed, which is a referendum where the Sahrawi people could choose their own future. While the United Nations does not enforce its resolutions, Morocco keeps enforcing its military occupation over the territory. They do this through several practices, such as bringing in Moroccan settlers to take over the territory. Now, for example, there is 3 Moroccans for each Sahrawi citizen. By signing military agreements with countries such as Israel, and by plundering the natural resources of Western Sahara with the collaboration of European companies and the European Union. It is important to mention that even though, for example, the European Court of Justice states that this is totally illegal, the European Union keeps plundering the natural resources of Western Sahara. On November 13th of 2020, nearly 30 years of signing the ceasefire, the Moroccan occupying military forces tried to occupy a buffer zone. This is a zone that only the UN can access. This action from the Moroccan occupying forces brought us to the end of the ceasefire that was signed in 1991. And since then, the war has been taking place in Western Sahara between the Polisario Front and the Moroccan occupying forces. The Sahrawi people remain divided in the Sahrawi refugee camps and under occupation in Western Sahara, waiting for a solution that was promised to them by the United Nations more than 30 years ago. It is obvious that the responsibility of the United Nations and of the Security Council is to enforce the resolutions and to impose the application of international law. However, when it comes to certain contexts such as the one of Western Sahara, where certain countries have interests, they do not do it. This, however, does not affect the strength or the resilience of the Sahrawi people. The Sahrawi people will keep their struggle until they achieve the right to self-determination and the right to build their own independent state in their territory, Western Sahara.